The Camino de Santiago can hurt. It should probably come with a health warning. I'll explain why and give you 3 tips to reduce the pain a bit. Coming right up. So if you are planning your first Camino, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but yes, the Camino de Santiago can hurt in a number of ways, ways that you might not be even thinking about. So I'm going to explain that and share 3 tips right at the end on how to kind of reduce that pain a little bit. So you might be thinking, hey, I'm a thru hiker, or I'm very fit, I play squash or whatever. The Camino is going to be a walk in the park. I suppose technically it kind of is a walk in the park. It's not a technical hike. We're not mountain climbing or anything like that. There's a lot of walking on roads, on good footpaths, a few mountain trails, but none of it is really sort of technical hiking. It's a bit like going for a 20 or 30 kilometre Sunday afternoon walk, but day after day. That takes its toll after a while. So let's talk about the different ways that the Camino de Santiago can hurt and how you can avoid that. So first of all, physical hurt. I would hazard a guess, I don't know any statistics on this, but I would hazard a guess that probably half the people who walk a Camino of whatever distance probably get injured. Now don't let that put you off, because those injuries might be relatively harmless, like blisters, although they can be particularly painful, shin splints, pulling tendons, sore knees, all sorts of things. But I would suggest that at least half people develop some sort of injury while they're walking. So be prepared for that. And I almost started this video by saying the Camino hurts, and it's kind of supposed to. I mean, that's going to sound a bit weird, but I walk the Camino as a pilgrimage. If you've seen the channel for a while, you'll know that. People walk it for all kinds of reasons. And I think walking it as a pilgrimage, it's got to be a bit of a challenge, and a little bit of pain here and there is probably par for the course. If you're not used to hiking, walking long distances, it's probably going to hurt a bit. But to me, that's kind of all part of the deal. So the physical side, yeah, it's going to be, depending on how fit you are, how used you are to hiking, it can be painful. So how do you get around that? Certainly do some training beforehand, but don't overtrain. You don't want to be injured before you start. There's this saying that don't walk your Camino before you walk your Camino. I injured myself before my first one because I overtrained, really silly. Now I do some gentle walks in the sort of weeks leading up, and I gradually start carrying a pack and things like that. Some people go full on, and if they're going to walk 30 k's a day on their Camino, they build up their training so that before the Camino they're walking 30 k's a day with a full pack. That's one way of doing it. I would worry that I'm going to get injured in the training, to be honest. So how I get around that is I start slow. I mean that in walking slower, but more so shorter distances, which can be a little bit difficult because you're trying to hold yourself back a little bit at the beginning and ease into it. That's hard because you're going to meet lots of great people and they're walking quicker than you, or they're walking further, and you want to keep up, and that's a whole other topic. But certainly do a little bit of training before you go. Try to start out a little bit slower, shorter distances and things like that, and that will help with that physical element. By all means, study how to avoid blisters. I've got a great video on how to avoid blisters, I'll put that up there. Touch wood, Pat and I have never had a blister on Camino yet, so do try those tips. And in terms of the physical things, make sure you're warming up in the mornings, make sure you're warming down at the end of the walk, stretching, all of that good stuff. I probably stretch, I kid you not, I probably stretch 50 times a day when I'm on Camino. It's not like I'm spending 5 minutes doing it. Stretching for me is probably a minute of stretching in the morning, the back of the calves and things like that, the tendons. But through the day, because I get Achilles tendonitis, I'm constantly stretching my Achilles. So, every couple of Ks, if there's a hill coming, I'll just pause. I'll lean on my walking poles. I'll stretch the Achilles a couple of times on each side before I go up, just to warm them up, stretch them a little bit. So constantly aware of stretching. If I stop for a coffee, stretch before, stretch after, all that. Make it a habit. When I wake up in the morning, even before I get out of bed, I'm doing a few back stretches. I'll do some of those, what do they call them, the sort of cat arching exercises, all sorts of things. It just takes a minute or two, but constantly doing that all helps with that physical injury. And use walking poles. Learn to use them. So the physical bit, you can kind of prepare for and eliminate to a degree. I have to say, I was really surprised on my last Camino. It was my longest one yet, 1,200 kilometres. And it was probably the one where I carried less injury than before. And I'll tell you why at the end of the video. It's going to be one of my tips. But I just get more careful, I think, and look after my body better. Hydration is really important. So the physical bit is to a degree not that hard to handle. The other bit that hurts, though, is the emotional bit. And I've talked about this a few times on the channel. There'll be times when particularly if you're walking alone, you might feel lonely, you might feel guilty, being away from work or being away from family, responsibilities, things like that. All these sort of things creep into your head. You start getting these mind games. If you're with someone, this happens. If you're with someone, that can be a challenge. I have met people who started the Camino as friends and didn't stay friends. I haven't met any married couples yet who ended up divorced on the Camino, but the Camino can be quite a challenge, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And if you're walking with someone, a life partner or a friend, be aware of that. And that can be a little bit of a challenge. But I walk mainly on my own, and I find the physical bit relatively easy to cope with, but the emotional bit I've got to be very aware of and sort of manage. And on a couple of Caminos, I've had 2 or 3 days where I've been really down and glum and feeling like I should go home and all sorts of things. So you've got to learn to be able to cope with that too. The other area that can hurt is at the end of the Camino and post-Camino. And I've got a video on this, the post-Camino blues. And I think just being aware of this can be helpful. So on my very first Camino, for example, I was well aware that there could be this feeling of loss, of letdown on arriving in Santiago, this feeling of anticlimax. And there was. I've arrived in Santiago a few times now. It's lessened actually over the years, but that's quite a common feeling. Because depending, how far you've walked, you might have been walking a week or a month. The longer you've been walking, the more severe it can be, I think, because you've got used to this simple life, of just walk, eat, sleep, repeat. A lot of people say that, and life out in nature, and suddenly, life can become a lot more pleasant than it is at home. You don't have the responsibilities and the distractions. And then suddenly it comes to a screeching halt when you enter the square in Santiago, and it's like, oh, no, I have to go home and work. So be aware of that. That can be half the battle, I think. And again, I'll put a link to that video up here, the Camino Blues. So that can happen at the end of your Camino, and it can take a while to adjust afterwards as well. So adjusting to your normal life back in the world, if you like, can be quite a challenge. If you're working, getting back to work and things like that. So a little bit of awareness, I think, of that can go a long way to preparing, to prepare that. So there's kind of 3 elements of hurt there, maybe that I'd just like to highlight. There's the obvious physical one. So be careful, train a bit, make sure whilst you're walking, you're doing lots of stretchings. You're not pushing yourself too hard, too far, too fast, that kind of thing. Emotionally, Just be prepared that you could go through a little bit of emotional turmoil, and that can be quite challenging, and I think that can cause some people to quit. You know, on my first Camino a couple of times I really wanted to go home, and I thought, no way. I've talked about this on the channel before, so I'm not going to do it again. But you know, I kind of pushed through that, and so glad that I did, because after a day or so I was fine. So the emotional challenge, and just be aware of that sort of post-Camino emotional challenge too, that it all comes to a screaming halt. You know, and that can be that sense of letdown, which kind of raises another point, of course, and that is that whilst Santiago is the destination for a Camino de Santiago, make sure you enjoy the journey, make sure you enjoy every step of the journey, because what you're going to remember is the journey. It's the experiences that you have on the journey. Santiago is the destination, sure, and it's great to go to Mass in Santiago and visit the crypt and venerate the remains of St. James and all those great things, but it's the journey that you're going to remember. So make sure, again, don't rush it. Enjoy everything. You know, enjoy the nature, the locals, the other pilgrims that you're meeting, because that's the bit that you're going to remember. So just a few different sort of perspectives there. It generally does hurt in one way or another, expect it. And probably actually the last thing that I should just mention is, talking about expecting things, don't have any expectations about what it's going to be like. So it's maybe sounds like a bit of a contradiction, but I mean that in the sense of, oh, I'm going to walk for 30 days and I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to walk for 30 days and I'm going to find God. Or I'm going to walk for 30 days and I'm going to find the answer to the rest of my life. Or, you know, some of those things, all of those things can happen, but don't expect they're going to happen. And if they don't, you won't be disappointed. Cool things do happen. They might not just be the things that you expected. I've always had lots of cool things happen. So there we go. I'm in danger of rabbiting on now. But I mentioned I was going to have 3 tips for you right at the end to reduce the pain, to reduce the hurt, whether physical or emotional. So I've just mentioned the first one, that is, don't have any expectations of what you're going to get out of it. Just go with an open mind, go with an open heart. Number 2, take your time. Don't rush. And number 3, and I'm going to be blunt here, if you're a little bit chubby like me, training is fine. Trying to save weight in your backpack and drilling holes in your toothbrush is fine. But if you're 10 kilos overweight, guess what? There's a far easier way to reduce the weight on your feet. Just reduce your body weight a little bit. So I can say that because I'm chubby. Please don't take it the wrong way. So I'm in the middle of getting down to my walking weight again. My weight in between Caminos creeps up, and then I get my next Camino date locked in, and then it's, yeah, got to get fitter, reduce the weight. So I know what it's like. It can be tough, but that's what I was going to mention. My last Camino was 1,200 kilometers, and it was the most injury-free Camino yet. Why was it? Body weight. I promised myself that I would walk that Camino a lot lighter, and I walked it 6 kilos lighter than my first one, and it was a breeze. It was an absolute breeze. I was still technically overweight, you know, on the BMI scale, but I wasn't obese, which I think technically I was on the first one. Just, you know, 5-6 kilos, I say just, you know, with a bit of discipline. It's not that hard to lose. That weight loss made all the difference. So much so that I'm going to make sure on my next Camino I'm even 5 kilos lighter than that, because there's just that sense of feeling lighter was incredible, and I'm sure was the main contributor to me not having any injuries at all. So there we go, a little bit of an arm twist if you're a bit chubby like me. But thanks for watching. Sorry to share the news, but for most people, the Camino hurts. Get over it and enjoy it. Bye for now.